Hi, and welcome to From Many People's Strength, the podcast that covers Saskatchewan politics and current events. My name is Cory, and my pronouns are he and him.
My name is David, and my pronouns are they, them, or he, him.
Okay, so we've got a little bit of news.
Yeah. I think we'll save it for the sort of second half of the show, but the big story is one that I know certainly I felt sort of somewhat directly impacted by, and most of my social circle was directly involved in. Had a number of friends quoted in the news, so we'll get to that. I guess a little bit later in the podcast. We'll go through some other stories a little bit quicker, so we can leave the two sort of more in-depth stories or three more in-depth stories till a bit later.
Saskatchewan to increase monthly 911 fees. Saskatchewan is doubling the fee for 911.
Yep.
Saskatchewan Public Safety Agency said the fee, which is applied to all phone bills, will be going from 94 cents per month to $1.88 per month, effective April 7th.
Yeah.
So this is something to be aware of. I don't know if there's much to say.
It's one of those. It's still less than $1 change. I think it's important to know. One of the things in this story that it's 2021, and this is something I don't understand why it hasn't been done 20 years ago, is going forward, they're just going to index it to inflation.
Yeah, no kidding.
We've known inflation exists for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
Why things like, again, a bit of a broken record on some of this topic sometimes, but like government salaries, fees of this nature, a minimum wage. Why are we not just automatically indexing these things to the consumer price index, or some other metric of inflation, if you want to use something other than the CPI? Like, that's normal. You should do that. And then you don't, like, again, doubling sounds bigger than it really is, and that this was a 94-cent increase per month. For what I think even the most hardcore libertarian would acknowledge is probably a fairly fundamental service.
Maybe not the most hardcore, but
maybe not the most. But at that point, like if you're cutting off 911, at that point, I think you're going one step beyond libertarian into just there shouldn't be a government at that point.
Yeah,
I won't use the term anarchist because I know you have emotional attachment to the term.
Notice the banner.
Yeah. So in any case, I think we can mostly acknowledge that 911 is a pretty vital service. We should be paying for it. Arguably, maybe that's having it come from phone fees, whatever. Like you can argue where that money comes from.
It's got to get paid for somewhere.
Got to get paid for somewhere. And again, going forward, tying it to the CPI, just as common sense. Because then where I was leading with that is then you don't have an overnight doubling of a fee. What you'll probably see happen going forward is a 1 or 2 cent or 2 to 4 cent increase per year. Yeah. And you know what? Most people can probably budget an extra, or per month. Most people can budget an extra 4 cents a month.
Right. So, and like you say, in this case, 94-cent increase, nobody's going to notice that. But next time, if they just waited and next time they double it again, now you're looking at 3 something. And then if you just double it again, then you're looking at a 6 something. Like,
and again, it's a good example because it is small. We can kind of laugh about it to some extent.
Right.
However, again, conceptually, it draws attention to the fact that we need to just tie things to inflation so that we're not. It also, to some extent, removes that human element. So you're not having someone being the person who's getting pilloried in the public square for being the guy responsible for making things more expensive.
SHA warns of risks of loosening coronavirus rules. Yeah, I mean,
of course they do. It's a political decision, not a science-based one. It's not a policy-based decision. It is, and the health authority is saying that pretty bluntly, especially with the risk of variants. Especially with how far behind we are in vaccinating. I was in a conference this weekend, chatting with some people from across North America, and there's people from the US in there, and they're like, oh yeah, no, I've got my first shot, or like the people who are over 60 was like, yeah, got my second shot already, looking forward in 3 weeks to being able, it is remarkable how in a period of 4 months, the United States went from drastically behind Canada in addressing these issues to dramatically ahead. Now, they still have a lot of the political issues they have around anti-maskers and people who believe it's a hoax. And, I don't want to, I don't think, there was an overnight, as of
no.
January 21st, all of a sudden, all of the hoaxers disappeared. I shouldn't even say 4 months because that was the election. Really, Biden took over less than 2 months ago now. And the American ability to vaccinate has been incredibly remarkable. And that's not entirely political. I'm not going to put 100% of the blame on Trudeau's feet, nor am I going to put 100% of the credit at Biden's feet for the two countries swapping places. But
it's clear that something's different in the way it's being handled, right?
It's still something is different, right?
And I heard at the end of the week, they were saying that they were going to be up to 2 million vaccinations per day in the United States. And we are not even close to our percentage equal to that. So
no. So anyways, going back to the loosening of measures, and I've used this analogy before. Yes, I think it's apt. Anytime you get antibiotics, the doctor tells you every single time, take it to the end. If you're prescribed 10 days and you're feeling better after 9, go the full 10 days. If you take it for 6 days and you're feeling better after 6, still take it the full 10.
Yeah.
If you're feeling better after 2 days, still take it for the full 10.
I think, and I mean, we had it in the notes before, but I think I removed it. But the conference press conference or whatever you call it, when Scott Moe was saying that they were going to release or loosen restrictions a little bit, it was like you were getting two separate messages, one from Dr. Shahab and one from Scott Moe. And, I mean, we're talking about a public health issue here. So I don't know who other people think they should listen to, but I know who I
of the two. And that's still our Canada's bureaucracy is far more arm's length than the American bureaucracy is. So Dr. Shahab isn't in the same position as someone like Dr. Fauci was, where his job is at risk if he speaks against his boss. I don't think Mo's going to fire Shahab if Shahab contradicts him. However, Mo is still his boss. So the fact that even then he's still willing to come out and say, hey,
act as if the restrictions are the same.
This idea that you're, it's and again, weird analogy, but I remember growing up in Ottawa when I was a young teenager, because I moved to Saskatchewan when I was 16. And I remember talking to a teacher, like, why is there so much more underage drinking in Quebec than Ontario? Because the legal limit's 18 and Ontario is 19. So that Ottawa-Hull border, it's one city split in half, and half of the city has a drinking age of 19 and half of the city has a drinking age of 18.
It's like Lloydminster.
Yeah, exactly like Lloydminster. And I'm guessing there might be a similar phenomenon there. And it's like, why are there so many more 16-year-olds drinking in Hull though than in Ottawa? Because you're illegal in either place.
Right.
And I remember a teacher explaining it, thinking, well, it's because it's a lot easier for a 16-year-old to look 18. Right? Like, so the loosening of restrictions not only allows loosening to that level, it allows people who have already been breaking the rules to feel like they can loosen it further. I was talking to someone recently who, like, over the last 2-3 months, she has visited 8 different households and well over dozens of people, at least a couple dozen people, and found out about the restrictions loosening. I was like, oh, I wonder if I can now expand who I'm seeing. I'm like, no, like, you're already beyond what the new rules allow, let alone what the, like, but I think you're going to see that happening a lot more. You're going to see people who are already breaking the rules break them worse when the rules get looser. And I think that's a thing that we all need to be somewhat concerned about. Yeah.
And I think, like, you're going to, well, I mean, even just in my experience this weekend, people were already feeling like, okay, well, I mean, they're a little loose, so now I can just do whatever I want.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. So we'll see. Hopefully, my guess is if someone's willing to listen through an hour of you and I talking, they're probably already following the rules. But
yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's
but
seems quite likely.
Hopefully, smarter heads will prevail, cooler heads will prevail. And we can keep our numbers low until the vaccination does start rolling out in greater force. So
unions caution Sask government against privatizing Regina Pioneer Village care home. I didn't actually realize this was a thing until I saw this article. Like, I kind of thought it was obvious at this point that privatizing these homes is not a good move.
but if you cut funding to them to the extent where they become so bad, like that's the blueprint, right?
Yeah.
You intentionally sabotage things that are run by the government to the point where they are no longer functioning, and then go, oh, we have no choice but to privatize.
Yeah. That's right.
Because everyone's leaving. No one's like, they're losing residents because they've cut funding so much. And then you go, oh, well, we have to privatize. And then you're dealt with a situation where it's even worse. Right. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So obviously the union is concerned because this is going to impact their members, and as well as the overall way that a care home is run. I mean, it is possible that since the government doesn't want to fund it properly, that a private company would come in and fund it better than it's currently being funded. But
even then,
that's not the answer. Yeah, even then, I doubt it.
And it'll also then leave a gap, because where I think private facilities are going to function better than public ones is at the upper income levels, is when someone does have enough residual wealth that they can invest in their lifestyle post-retirement. And so you have private care facilities that do offer, much better care for 10 times the cost.
Right. Yeah. Like luxury type accommodations,
or even like 3 or 4 times the cost. Right. And so now you start getting the same gap you do in housing at any age, is you start developing that gap where the only options you have are living in a facility that's well below what we should consider a conscionable standard of living in a developed society. And then you go straight from that to unaffordable by a lot of people.
Yeah.
So it's when we think about, I think a lot of people who have real issues about the income inequality that exists, and justifiably so. We'll talk about the disappearing middle class. I think another issue is the disappearing working class. We still have the people who are middle class working white collar jobs, pensions, making that $60,000 to $100,000 a year range. Two income household possibly as well. So double that. And they are going to be able to retire well. But then I think what we're missing is the folks who working blue collar jobs and still having some semblance of that. I don't think even in the 50s, the guy working the assembly line was making the same as the plant manager and retiring in the same level of luxury as the plant manager. Right. Even though both were sort of part of that middle class or part of that working class.
There's still a divide there.
There's still a divide there. And I don't think any system of economics, even a communist or anarchist one, is going to eliminate that divide, at least not in the next 100 years.
No, that's right. It would, like you say, it's one of those things where it takes the entire revamp of the system, and then you have to progress first towards where you're actually going.
You're needing to reach like a Star Trek level of post scarcity, right?
Yeah, that's right.
We're not at that level of post scarcity yet. We're in some ways we're getting closer. And we shouldn't have the gap we do have. Anyway, but
the gap is too big now.
The gap is too big. But we have gaps in a couple different places. Yeah. I think we think about an income gap, and I think that is, or a wealth gap. And I think that is a dangerous mindset to have because there's multiple gaps in that progression. It does sort of create a bit of a bell curve when you look at actual net worths. But I think in lifestyle qualities, that's where you're probably seeing some of those much more significant jumps where you cross certain thresholds. And I think where this is going to really hit people hard is that threshold where, people are needing that care home support, but don't have the pension, are basically relying on CPP and OAS, or have a small pension or small RSPs saved up. Right. And now instead of being able to live frugally but comfortably, their choices are going to be borrowing from their children, possibly dying in debt, coming up with some way of generating the money to pay for a private facility that gets them a decent quality of care, or finding themselves somewhere there where the quality of care, just like I said, is an unconscionable level of care for a developed society. So hopefully we can get a turnaround on that. I think this is one where I think to some extent the Sask Party is maybe somewhat vulnerable, in that, it's elderly people like that. That's who are impacted by that. Like that is part of their base. Yeah. So
a lot of their voters are going to be going into these homes at some point, not too far from now. So.
And hopefully, there could be enough, enlightened self-interest to raise the alarm of what's happening.
A Regina resident racks up more than $68,000 in tickets. It's very impressive.
Yeah, that is impressive. Yeah. Does the article say how many tickets he has, or should we try and figure out the math on that?
Yeah, I don't know. The individual is just one of 30 residents who collectively owed the city of Regina more than $500,000. That's a lot of money in tickets.
Yeah.
From 30 people?
Yeah, the top 5 in Regina are 68,000, 31, 26, 24, and 23,000. Saskatoon's highest owed is 10,000. So I'm wondering if there's a difference in collection there. I'm kind of surprised towing or impounding doesn't enter the equation at some point.
Yeah, I always thought that after so many dollars in tickets, they just put a boot on your car, or they towed you to an impound lot.
Like I said, I don't think neither you nor I are huge fans of government overreach, but this one just seems bizarre.
If you're going to charge for parking, and you're going to charge tickets or whatever for parking in the wrong spots.
It does talk about how in the article that how the spokesperson of the city of Regina may pursue legal, which includes liens, warrants, boots on the vehicle, seizing and selling vehicles. So they have the legal right to do that. I'm puzzled by how it got to 68,000 before they did.
In Moose Jaw, outstanding parking ticket fines amount to $940,000.
Yeah, it's
holy cow.
Yeah, it's strange.
I assume these are city spots and lots, right? Like,
because if it's owed to InPark, then that's private.
I have had 2 InPark tickets, and I looked at the person when they were writing them up, and I said, "I am not paying this. I was here for 5 minutes. I'm not paying this."
I once had been paying the monthly thing, and I still got tickets, and boy, that was not a fun deal fight. They eventually did, right? Because you spend however long and fax whatever you need to fax. This is back when faxing was still a thing.
Wow.
I don't know what you say. It was generated between 2014 and 2018. I don't get it. That's a lot. Yeah. And they start off small and they jump up in price. I think there's $60 if you don't pay them on time. So that would be over 1,000 tickets, unless some of them are even more expensive than that. But 1,000 tickets, 250 tickets a year. Is that just basically every single day parked in a city spot and got a $60 ticket?
It's got to be, right?
Yeah.
That's wild.
If you're parking downtown every day, though, you can rent parking spots, and
for cheaper than that.
And again, maybe this is this one of those cases where my economic privilege is showing, and it's someone couldn't afford the $150 a month to get a parking spot, so therefore
they just park and end up with tickets.
So, but it had to start at some point. 3 tickets costs more than one entire month worth of. And anyways, I don't know what more to say on this story. It's just bizarre. And it's also bizarre that Regina is so much worse than Saskatoon. I'm not quite sure where that is generated from, but
it would be interesting to see an analysis done of this and why, is it related to, the systems of parking that each city has, is it related to a class level, income levels where people can, like you say, pay for rented spots more or whatever?
And Saskatoon's system is to some extent a better system than Regina's, right? They don't have meters; they have those booths where you just punch in your license plate and then you're good for however long you paid for.
You can do it with your card. You don't have to have change.
Yeah. And Regina's Regina now has the app. That you can do through. It's similar, but the app's functionality hasn't always been the greatest over the years. And there was that experiment a couple of years ago where they installed a whole bunch of these electronic meters that were credit card compatible, but they didn't work in the cold, so they didn't work in winter. So that was someone not planning things through very well. So anyways, it's important, as much as it sucks, it's important to have something that is a disincentive to park, because it then means there is parking available for those who need it, and it shifts the demand away from driving. So I get why it's there, above and beyond the revenue generation. There is a city planning methodology behind having paid parking downtown, and
I know, and there's legitimately spots that you can park for certain amounts of time, but then if you're there during the bus times, then you can't park there, right? And if you were to park,
maybe those are where some of these higher fees came from. I don't know.
Could be.
It's bizarre, but I don't know much more opinion to be said on that.
Yeah.
This is one of those classic stories where everyone thinks the outrage is going in one direction, and it's almost always going the other. Because it was a case where someone said, hey, this person was a really shitty person. Maybe we shouldn't have a street named after them. Like, not outraged, not burning buildings or holding, like, just not making a big deal. Just said, hey, maybe we should change the name. It doesn't cost much to change a name. Like, reprint some signs. There's a little bit of a cost, but there's lots of other things we change. And cities change street names all the time. When we change, like, a numbered street name to something else to commemorate someone.
For sure.
Heck, I think in Regina we have some streets that are named after football players because of how good they were at the footballing. Yep. So, like, hey. And then, of course, it's always the, why is everyone making a big deal of it? People who are making a big deal of it.
Yeah. When really, it was just one person sent a letter, and the city's looking at it and going, well, maybe this isn't a bad idea.
Yeah. And then the outrage at outrage folks decide that this is a horrific thing. So
it's Dr. Seuss all over again.
It's Dr. Seuss all over again.
AstraZeneca clinics for eligible recipients set for Regina this weekend, this was March 12th. So this was before the weekend.
Yep.
Drive-through clinics were set up to open this last weekend for people over the age of 64. Yep. In Regina.
Yep.
Yeah. I thought this was great.
We're getting there. Slowly but surely. 125 vaccination sites, 150,000 appointments that could get made. Started off residents 80 and over and going from there. I'm 44, so I was taking a look at it seemed based on estimates from the province, probably May for me, maybe April if I'm lucky, maybe June if I'm not. Was when I took a peek to see where things were sitting. Slowly but surely, I guess. It's weird because the U.S. is much more segmented. Like, the U.S. in general is much more decentralized, especially around healthcare. But it seems like on the COVID response, they have a much stronger national push, whereas Canada, I think, because our delineation of powers is so much more clear cut when it comes to healthcare. Right. I think the patchwork thing, I think, is hurting every province because every province has to reinvent the wheel for this distribution system. So you have, 10 provinces, and I don't know if the territories are doing their own thing or if that is federally covered because it's a territory, but you have I'm not sure. Between 11 and 14 different jurisdictions all having to arrange their own distribution networks. You lose out on a bit of an economy of scale as opposed to that sort of what seems to be a far more national approach within the U.S. Again, their states are theoretically much more independent than our provinces are, but on this particular issue, they seem to be able to implement something on a national scale much better. But that's also outside looking in. So,
yeah, that's true. I just look at their numbers and I go, holy cow. I wish we were getting close to that fast.
Yes. Or 1/10, right? Like if we could hit 1/10, then we're pacing, right? That's sort of that when you look at the US to Canada, it's always that factor of 10. And we're not there. So City Saskatchewan's replacing some of their vehicles in their fleet. It's good. It saves money. Electric vehicles are good for city driving. Like they absolutely are fantastic for city driving.
And if you have a spot where you can plug them in overnight or whatever, then you're laughing, right?
Well, and the city, I don't know if it talks about the type of charging they're using, but I'm assuming they're going to use level 2 chargers, which charge them fairly quickly. So you can park them for a few hours and go back out again if need be. Okay, There's 3 levels, for those who don't know, there's 3 levels of charging for electrical vehicles. Conveniently named level 1, level 2, and level 3.
Just for perfect clarity.
Great thing. Electric vehicles, like 10, 15 years ago when the manufacturers were first looking into it, they all said, hey, let's come up with a standardized charging system. So every single electric vehicle charges using the same type of charger, which
That's awesome.
Common sense, but it's great that they did. So level 1 is just plugging into a wall. Like you can charge an electric vehicle just by plugging it into the same wall outlet that you plug in your block heater.
Nice.
And then there's a level 2, which they range anywhere $500 to $1,000 per charger. If you're putting it in your own home, you can buy ones that are like wired right into the wiring, where you're paying about $500 plus another $500 for the electrician to do something. Or you get ones that basically plug into the equivalent of like a dryer or a stove outlet, those 240 outlets.
So when you stop at the the Canadian Tire charging station, what is that?
Those are level 2 chargers.
Okay.
And then there's a level 3 charger, which they just don't have here yet. Those charge ridiculously fast, but can only charge the battery up to 80% because it'll damage the battery if it charges all the way to 100.
Oh, okay. Too much charge too fast.
Too much charge too quickly, yeah. So to give you an idea, because area of expertise, because I own an electric car for over 5 years. If it was completely, totally drained down to nothing, just a level 1 charge would basically take between 12 and 14 hours to fully charge again. So if I had gotten it completely drained to nothing, get home from work at 6 o'clock, although I would never, it wouldn't be drained down to nothing if I was only getting home at 6. It'll still be charged by the next morning, right? Level 2 cuts that down to about 6 hours, from about 14 hours down to 6 hours if you're completely drained. And then the level 3, if you're completely drained to 80%, is half an hour.
Oh, wow.
So very quick. But this would, if the city is having a fleet, they're going to do level 2 chargers. Level 3 chargers become very, very expensive.
Right. Yeah.
And really are only in major cities that have it. But again, we will eventually get those. Like the equivalent of gas stations will be level 3 chargers.
Right. Yeah. You'll walk up, you'll charge, and you'll go.
Yeah. Because again, you won't be completely drained. You'll be, half, just like when you fill up with gas, most people don't wait till the light's on. Maybe not most people. I don't know. We'll see who, I don't know what that percentage is, but you take, it's still longer. It's still, even at a level 3 charger, you're taking 15 minutes to charge if it's a half depleted battery, right? So, but again, the city talks about here the cost savings to the city will be huge. And the vehicles don't cost that much more. When I bought mine, comparing it to an equivalent gas-powered vehicle, I probably paid a premium. It's hard because you're comparing apples to oranges, but upfront cost, I probably paid about an extra $4,000. And then,
so not that big of a difference.
No, really. I owned a Nissan Leaf. I compared it to, what was it? The equivalent, as a Nissan Versa. I compared it to a couple different similar cars, and paid about $4,000 more than I would for gas powered, and saved over $1,000 a year because my gas, it's about a 10 or 11 to 1 ratio. So I did the math. I paid about $100 a year in electricity, for fueling the car. And I drove what would be the equivalent of about $1,100 a year worth of gas if I had been driving a car that got 9 liters per 100 kilometers.
Okay.
Which, again, that's a pretty standard, good fuel. This is 2012 when I bought it, but, a good, compact, mid-size fuel efficiency car. Yep. Most cars are, yeah. So
that's pretty damn good.
The other nice feature about it is the maintenance is virtually nothing. Over the 5 years I owned it, the only real thing I had to do was replace the cabin air filter, and drove into Mr. Lube going, I don't have oil that needs changing, but I'm not a car person. Can you do and they charged me a couple dollars for it. They were great. They were more excited than I was because they got to work on this car.
Right.
But again, it's going to be the same thing for the city. There's no transmission, there's no oil changes. There's a battery cost. So you do have a cost of replacing the battery after about 7 to 8 years. And that cost is not small, but still significantly less. And again, the carbon footprint, if it was fueled, if all of the electricity, 100% of the electricity came from coal-fired power plants, it still has a carbon footprint about 1/10 that burning gas does. Just because, again, we've talked about this before, electricity is efficient.
What day was it? The day that this sermon
Sunday
came out. Yeah. So the day that, yeah, I guess so. The day that the sermon came out, the next day on Reddit, I saw this article, or maybe it wasn't this article in particular, but it was.
There were a number of them. It was
people talking about it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I went directly to the Victory Church Facebook to report the sermon video as hate speech. Yeah. Because it is basically so.
Yep. It definitely it definitely violates Facebook's terms of service.
Right.
I also report it as violating Facebook's terms of service. I got told no, it didn't. They left it up. I don't know if it has since come down because of enough people reporting it, but I don't believe so.
Yeah, probably not. They'll ban you for saying something like Americans are silly, but actual hate speech. They'll leave
homosexuality is the same thing as pedophilia. That's fine, apparently. Yeah.
So this article in particular is where he doubles down. He was confronted about this, and community leaders were pissed off, and rightly so.
Yep.
And he doubled down and said that he stands by his sermon and his opinion, and he's not gonna cave to cancel culture,
right? Because
fucking culture war nonsense. But
yeah.
Anyway, you were gonna say something.
No, I think it's. I think you are seeing one of those intersections of how COVID is intersecting with events that were already happening, because he's probably been making this exact same sermon for as long as he's been a pastor.
Right.
This probably is. I would be shocked if this was new or the first time he has said this in a service. But it's because it's now broadcast, right? Like that's like,
yeah, people can see it that aren't like in the room with him.
And this is where it's you have competing ethical beliefs. Honestly, and I feel like we need to do more to support the people who are forced to go to these services, usually by their parents. However, unless they're inciting violence, what's said in the quote unquote privacy of the church, I don't necessarily think, and I'm torn on it. I don't know what the right answer is, but I don't necessarily feel we should have governments coming in and telling pastors what they can and can't say in their own churches, as long as the church, they're not actually inciting violence. There's a line somewhere there, and again, where you draw that line. Now, completely independently of that, I have a lot of other beliefs around churches, like the fact that, because right now their churches are not allowed to be overtly political without losing their tax exemption status. So that limits some of the speech they're allowed to say in order to maintain their tax exemption status. I think the solution is just don't have churches be tax exempt. Treat a church no different from a health club or a gym or a social club.
Or if treat them, if they're going to have a charitable arm, then like they have to show that they're doing charity with the money they take in for that charity.
And so that eliminates a lot of those speech restrictions. If you just say, fine, churches are allowed to talk politics, but they don't get a tax exemption anyway, so they don't lose the tax exemption. I am torn at the idea that a human rights complaint can be used to silence what a pastor says from his own pulpit in his own church. That seems like a very dangerous precedent to set, and I don't know where that line does get drawn then, because reading from a lot of holy text, just straight up verbatim reading the text,
right, is
going to cross
result
those lines.
in like a lot of like those.
And again, here the forward-looking part of it is, I don't trust governments to not weaponize that type of ruling against marginalized faiths far more than they use it against Christian faiths. So this ruling comes out that says, or if it goes to the Human Rights Tribunal, the ruling goes against Victory Church. I can guarantee you someone in the city, some Christian conservative more than likely, is going to bring an almost identical complaint against the Muslim community or the Sikh community or some other non-Christian community.
It's that thing about speech every time, right? If you limit what conservatives can spread as misinformation and hate speech on Facebook and Twitter, then you're going to get marginalized groups organizing for BLM, or you're going to get anarchists and communists also being limited, or and the way that you view that speech, like obviously I view certain types of speech as fine and other types as not, but I'm not the algorithm that's making those decisions. And
so again, what I think we do need to do, and again, I think a false alternative gets presented a lot of times, that our choices are either use the power of the state to suppress it or do nothing. And I think that's just let it happen. I think that's a false alternative. I think so too. You roundly condemn it. You call it for what it is. You publicly say, this church is showing you who they are. This church is a church of hate. Because I'm not suppressing anyone's speech by publicly talking about how this is a church of hate.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
That is providing information. It is providing information saying to parents of children who go there, you are literally putting your child at risk. You are the equivalent of handing them a bottle of aspirin and hoping they don't eat the bottle. Because if your child is gay or trans, or some other element of gender or sexually diverse, statistically, you are putting their life at risk by exposing them to this type of hate.
Yeah. And
is that worth it? Is your child's life worth attending this church? I
mean, okay, yes. Only the parents can make that decision. But I think that any reasonable person can say, if you make the decision that to continue going to that church, you're making the wrong decision. You're making a decision that is bad, right?
Yeah.
But legally, we can't stop you from making that choice.
Yeah. And you have the legal right to go there. Other people have the legal right to think you're a garbage human being for do so.
Yeah.
Right. That's the trade-off.
Yeah.
Your rights aren't being suppressed if people think you're garbage.
Right. Exactly.
Right. You're not.
You're allowed to be garbage.
Bigoted.
Yeah. You're allowed to be bigoted. A bigot. You're allowed to be garbage.
Yeah. So. And I think that's the thing is drawing attention. And I think it's important for, and this did happen and I'm happy about it. It's important for progressive Christians to come out and say, this is not I'm hesitant to say this is not us, because yes, it is. Like,
Right.
don't be saying this is not us, but coming forward and saying, we accept you, we affirm who you are as a person, not just tolerate, not just love the sin or hate the sin, but actively support you in who you are as a person. And I think, and acknowledge that there's still work to do. I had a conversation recently where we were talking about this, and I think there's a very common argument made within progressive churches about, and I see this all the, the signs that get people are marching through these ally support type rallies and saying things like, all the times Jesus condemned homosexuality, and it's a blank page underneath it. Acknowledging that that's not actually true. Like, there
Right.
are biblical, like New Testament parts in the Sermon from the Mount says, I came not to eliminate one iota of the law. So these are things that you need to acknowledge.
That's right. Within your faith, you need to grapple with these issues on some level.
And
if you still want to, if you want to say I'm ignoring that part, I disagree with that part, I'm on board with that.
But be explicit about that. You are actively ignoring something in the book, not just pretending that the book isn't there. I get a very similar energy, from the progressive Christians who are, the Bible doesn't condemn homosexuality, and they really meant pedophilia, or they didn't really mean it, and it was misinterpreted or mistranslated. I get a very similar energy as I get from the people who say, like, the Confederate flag is just about heritage, not about hate.
Right.
Like, you can be proud of your Southern heritage. Be proud of your Southern heritage, but don't deny the fact that there are elements of it that absolutely are about hate. No one is telling you can't be a Christian. Just don't deny that there are elements of your faith and your faith history that have their grounding in hate as well.
Before we move on to the final story of the evening, there was a new article that came out today on the same subject about a rally. Regina's LG. They've got the T first. That always throws me off.
Yeah, LGBTQ2S. Often it's often now the 2S has been moved to the beginning as well. So different changes to that order happen all the time for various reasons.
Okay. Yeah,
GSD is hopefully going to take root. Gender and sexually diverse. GSD is hopefully going to take root and become the standard in our lifetime, because it's so much simpler.
Yeah, gender and sexually diverse community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yes, there was a fake apology or a half apology that came out.
Yes. There was a rally in front of Regina Victory Church, and there was a walking back of sort of. I didn't listen to the apology.
It's not really an apology.
Okay.
Like so often, the media reports things and calls them apologies when they're not.
Yeah. Saying I'm sorry that you were hurt isn't an apology.
Yeah, it's not an I'm sorry for what I said. It's an I'm sorry you were bothered by it.
Yeah, that's not an apology.
And so, there's a tone of, there is somewhat of a tone of contrition in it. I think he's also, sometimes the I'm sorry I got caught. I think no one wants to be thought of as a bigot.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
It's how often do you hear people say, I'm not racist, but, and then say a blatantly racist thing that any rational person would listen to and go, how do you not understand that was I'm not racist, but I just think white people are superior to black people in every way. What do you think the word means?
Yeah.
I'm not homophobic, but I just think homosexuality is the same as pedophilia. No, that literally you are being homophobic. Own that.
Yeah. At least be honest about what you're saying.
But I think there's this hesitant, no one wants to be thought of as a bigot, even when they're holding bigoted views. That's the raging against cancel culture, right?
Yeah.
when someone's angry about quote unquote cancel culture, it's, I don't want people to think badly of me.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what it means, right? It's I'm worried because my bigotry came out and now people think negative things about me. And I don't want that, even if they're accurate.
Yep. Yeah. And it's even like the whole rage against cancel culture. It's even a step beyond that, right? Like you shouldn't be allowed to think badly of me.
Yeah. You shouldn't be allowed. It definitely shouldn't be allowed to say negative things about me.
Right.
You saying negative things is a restriction of my free speech for some reason. So
somehow.
Yeah. And he didn't go that far. He raged against cancel culture. He didn't say they shouldn't be allowed to speak against him, but that's sort of usually the direction these things go. But
yeah,
we talked about this even before the podcast was recorded. I'm friends with virtually, other than the minister himself, friends with virtually everyone else quoted in these articles. Right. And I think there have been a number of queer Christians come to the forefront and speak about these issues, and I think that's important. And that's their story to tell. I went through that myself before I left the church. I think it's important for those who are still in the church to have their voices heard because they're the ones most hurt by this. And I'm glad the media is listening to the people they're listening to. As much as I sort of made fun of them calling something an apology when it isn't, most of the coverage has been pretty good and pretty fair. So
good. Okay, so Colin McGee successfully appeals firing from Regina police. Colin McGee was faced 3 assault charges resulting in 1 guilty plea, 1 acquittal, and 1 stay of proceedings. He's a former police officer, now potentially
not former
current,
anymore,
current police officer, who assaulted people, and apparently assaulting somebody is not a good enough reason to fire a police officer in the Regina Police Service, which I suppose is not a surprise, but is still incredibly disappointing.
And the terms of these assault, he was acquitted. The one he was acquitted on was he tackled a man who wouldn't put a pen down. He gave someone instructions to put a pen down, and they didn't put a pen down, so he tackled them. There's no, I thought it was a gun. He knew it was a pen.
Yeah.
There's like, that wasn't, and that was when he was acquitted on. The one where he received the conditional discharge with a year of probation, where he pled guilty, it was for assaulting a 13-year-old child.
Like, how can they fucking...
13-year-old child. Like, you have canon conspiracy theorists losing their mind over child abuse.
Yeah.
But then pled guilty to assaulting a child, 13 years old, who was in a detention cell. So was in custody already. This wasn't, a 13-year-old may have hurt. Like, no, they were in custody.
So Aaron Fox is McGee's lawyer, and he said he thinks that this decision shows that mental health can play a role in the behavior of police who have to make snap decisions. And he is quoted as saying, underneath the uniform is a person who is subject to all of the same life stressors that all of us may experience from time to time. These can lead to mental health issues. It is important that police services and members recognize and address that as needed. And that is, by and large, a decent statement. But his defense, by using that as the defense, it's just, for police, we have a lower bar than for your common citizen. If I lose my temper and beat somebody up or tackle them or, assault a 13-year-old kid, I'm going to jail. I'm losing my job. And that's fully justified. I should lose my job. I should go to jail. But a cop does it and it's fair game.
Yeah.
It's absolutely ridiculous. Like, We need to hold the police to a higher standard, not a lower standard. These are the people that are ruling over us in our day-to-day lives. They have power to shoot us, and somehow the bar for their behavior is lower than it is for the rest of us. I don't know.
It also like the incident with the child again. It was captured on security camera. 2 other members of the Regina Police Service stood and watched while he was assaulting a child. And when they were referred to the staff sergeant, they were identified as minor issues that spiraled down in a negative fashion. So we don't know what the motivating incident was, but like acknowledged that it was a minor issue where not only did the officer not de-escalate, he escalated. Right? Like,
yeah.
How many times in your life have you had a 13-year-old be lippy to you? Because I know I've had it happen a lot.
I have 2 teenage children.
If you assaulted either one of them after they were lippy and had a minor issue spiral down in a negative fashion to the extent where you assaulted your children,
yeah,
you would lose access to your children.
Yeah.
Right? You would not be allowed around children anymore. We can talk about whether people should be in jail as its own issue, but you definitely should have restrictions on you that mean you can't be around children anymore until you get your shit together.
Yeah.
This is like, again, the idea of there are no good cops. There are good people who are cops, not necessarily this individual, but we had 2 different officers watch while it was happening and do nothing. To Bray's credit, and I have, like, of all the police officers in this province, the one I've probably said the most positive things about in my life has been Evan Bray. I think a lot. I think on the topic of defunding police, he puts things in the wrong order because he says we shouldn't defund police until after we've solved the problems, as opposed to, no, the money needs to come from somewhere. He basically wants to double the amount of money and says, take all the money you want to take away from police and just generate it in other ways. Put all of that extra money into those social services first and then defund police, as opposed to shift the money from police. I think he is smart enough to know that's never going to happen because money doesn't just magically appear. But I can at least understand that perspective. For the most part, of all the police in this province, I think I have probably more respect for him than most. And to his credit, he did try firing this person.
Yeah.
But why are we not hearing, when stuff like this happens, police themselves standing up and shouting out in outrage,
exactly.
This is unacceptable. We should not have this within our ranks.
Because
this doesn't.
Because this is who they are.
Right.
I mean, like, sorry to interrupt you, but it's just like,
no.
I absolutely just think that the cops are awful, and that they just prove it over and over again. As an institution, they cannot be trusted with this amount of power. And if you want to say that you have human issues, like something stressing you in your life, then take a break. So you're not at work that day. Sure, that we can have discussions about having mental health relief in your job, so you don't lose income if you have, if you have to take time off. But you absolutely don't get to just beat the shit out of people.
Correct. Like no other. Like I can't imagine another. Like even the strongest unions in this country, I think, would lose most appeals if one of their members beat up a 13-year-old child while at work.
Yeah.
Like, if a teacher did it, imagine a teacher, right, would never teach again.
No, that's right.
There's no way.
Yeah.
And we always hear about every time there's the teacher contract is negotiated, how powerful the teachers unions are.
Right.
If you listen to John Gormley, the teachers unions are on par with the SS in their sheer ferocity and power. There's no way a teachers union.
How does anybody take that guy seriously?
There's no way a teachers union would win an appeal if a teacher beat up a 13-year-old child. And
they wouldn't even try.
The union's job is to try. The union would still send it they're allowed to try. They'd send a representative. They would appeal.
Yeah, okay. They would do the basic minimum.
Yeah. Yeah.
They would do the minimum.
They might if the teacher. Thinking of that, I don't think most teachers would try. I don't think most teachers would ask their union to appeal on their behalf.
No, I don't.
Or at least make the argument it was fight for compensation because it was the stress of the job that led to it or something like that. But
yeah, I don't know. Discussions about cops always piss me right off. I can't do it.
I know. I hear you. And I don't know. I guess part of why these conversations end up lasting as long as they do when we talk about these is I am so flabbergasted. I am just at a loss for the right words to say because I end up going in circles when talking about it because it is just so mind-boggling that someone who with a recorded history of violence towards those within his care and those without the ability to defend themselves, assaults a child who was in his care and in his custody, was disciplined by his own chief of police and let go after pleading guilty and just getting probation. And still somehow even that is too much.
Yep.
How do people defend that system? How do people say it's just a bad apple when the entire system allows him to both be there, get away with it, and return to active duty when caught?
Yep.
That's not a bad apple when it's that level of systemic. When two other officers stood by and watched while it happened the first time.
Well, yeah, that's right. It should be the responsibility of any cop to stop another cop from beating somebody up in that situation.
Yep.
You don't stand and watch. You don't team up the way that it seems like they often do. You stop that person from doing that.
Yeah.
At the very least, you will stop somebody from being injured in a way that is irreparable.
Yeah. So, I think at this point we've exhausted, I think, what can be said about it.
I do have trouble being articulate about police because all I want to say is like fuck them. Like, get rid of the whole thing. Burn the whole goddamn thing down. We can't have them anymore. They can't be trusted. First, on the video, no consequences for hate speech in Saskatchewan, Richard said that we would be surprised at the silent billionaires that in Saskatchewan. In that video, we did mention that we didn't think there was too many billionaires in Saskatchewan. So maybe there's more than we think.
Yeah, maybe. They could be. Do a Google search for billionaires in Saskatchewan. There is apparently one.
On badly explaining guns, Das Richard said, it's a Canadian solution for an American gun problem.
Okay.
Okay. Military grade assault weapon. My .22 is banned now. The receiver cannot fit a larger caliber. Feel free to come check it out. It's a Mossberg 715T. It's a rim fire. Not every banned gun was a center fire.
Okay.
I don't have any arguments against this stuff. I don't even, You could hunt with a Mini 14 and never could with an AR-15, and M16 was always prohibited.
Perfect. Then why are you upset about it being prohibited now?
Yeah, it shouldn't. That should stay prohibited. Good.
Great.
And then restricted guns do not represent the illegally owned source. They are imported through black market.
Yeah.
If my handgun is stolen, then I'll be in front of a judge. If I lose my handgun, I'll be in front of a judge. If my handgun is used by anyone but me, I'll be in front of a judge.
As you
Our
should
laws
be.
and regulations around restricted weapons are very intense.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't really have any arguments against those.
And I think one of the central thesis of both your and my argument was a chagrin at the fact that we don't have responsible gun owners entering the conversation around dealing with the problems, right? Like, obviously, Das Richard knows about guns. He owns them. What are his solutions then? Like, that's great. If you are saying the list of weapons are the incorrect weapons, we're addressing issues in the wrong way, okay, what are the solutions then? Because it's not like we don't have issues with gun violence in this country. We do.
Right.
Not to the extent that the United States does. That's a shitty metric. Like, not as bad as the worst developed country in the world. Like, that's not a good metric.
Yeah.
So what are the solutions? And one of the things that often happens in these circumstances is I want the responsible gun owners to stand by the solutions they suggest. Because one of the other things that seems to happen quite a bit is they say, oh, we shouldn't be doing A, we should be doing B. But then as soon as the government goes, oh, okay, let's do B then, the immediate turnaround is, oh, well, we shouldn't do B, we should do C. No, you were the one who suggested B. Like when we suggested
Let's
A.
do what you suggested the first time.
A good example of that is for the longest time, the argument had been, if this is a Toronto problem, Toronto should solve the problem, not do nationwide laws.
Right.
But as soon as Toronto and Montreal tried implementing their own rules, the exact same organizations who were saying we shouldn't come up with national solutions to a Toronto-specific problem came out and said individual cities shouldn't have the right to implement laws. That falls outside their jurisdiction.
Too often, the solution that they present is to do nothing and ignore the problem.
Yep.
If you legitimately have another solution, then we will listen to it. Mm-hmm. But if you're just going to ignore the problem, then you just have to deal with the shitty solution that you don't like.
Yeah. And you know what? If there's a list of 1,500 guns or 1,400 or 1,000 or 2,000 or whatever that list of weapons is, if there are issues in the list, address those. Like, don't like say, hey, here's why. Like, and that's like, again, I don't know of anyone who says, all governments are perfect and all bureaucrats are perfect and they're going to get the list right the first time.
In fact, I know many people who would say quite the opposite.
Right. And so addressing, that specific gun, this specific weapon, the argument, oh, well, there's a bunch of weapons on the list that were already banned. Well, great. Like that doesn't like,
double
then you're
ban
not,
doesn't hurt anybody.
Why are you worried about that then? Nothing's changing.
And if you're worried because the gun that you now own or that you own is now banned, then, and you think that that's an error, then you need to, instead of like, then you need to figure out a way to address that with people who can actually fix that. Otherwise, like, I mean, I appreciate the feedback from Richard.
Yep.
But we can't solve the list. No. We can't fix the list.
No.
And I'm not going to argue with him that his 22 should be banned. I don't know. I don't think it should be probably. So that's something that needs to be fixed.
Well, and I don't know, right?
I don't even really know.
I don't know if it should be banned or not. And I think you and I were both very honest in that episode about, we are not gun experts.
Right.
I have shot a few guns in my life. Probably less than a half dozen different types of handgun. Maybe less than a half dozen different types of long arm. I am not by any means a gun expert, by a long stretch. I can look at numbers and I can look at statistics and see, yes, we do have issues with gun violence in this country.
And as I got into this argument a little bit with my dad, actually, because he talks like an American in this, when it comes to guns, and says, well, gun control doesn't work anyway. And I looked at him and I said, actually, it really does. Countries that enact some level of gun control, like buyback programs and then bans, often have a dramatic drop in the amount of gun violence that happens. Yep. You can't deny that.
And it doesn't switch to other forms of violence, because that's the other argument. If they can't use guns, they'll just use knives. Well, no. And we see suicide rates drop when you ban guns, because guns are a really simple, quick way of committing suicide. Yeah. You take that away, you see suicide numbers drop. And and again, suicides aren't done with AR-15s; they're done with handguns, and I think handguns are a far bigger issue than assault weapons. I think Richard addresses a point where sort of tangentially, but handguns are of bigger concern than what we call assault rifles, and I think governments do focus on assault rifles more than they should compared to handguns, because they're bigger and scarier, and they look. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be concerned about them. That's like me saying, we shouldn't find a cure for pancreatic cancer because prostate cancer is a bigger concern. Well, no, we should probably find cures for both.
Yeah.
And no one come at me for bringing up cancers in the wrong order, but again, it's just this thing where, yes, then come to the table with the solutions, because we need gun owners coming to the table with solutions.
Yep.
Because they do know more. They are going to be able to be on those committees and say, this one shows up here, maybe it shouldn't. Here's why. And here's things we can do to address it.
That's one of the things. That's one of the things that is increasing in the U.S., but I haven't seen it increasing here yet. It's, you have people on the left, or people who are quote unquote responsible liberal gun owners, saying, okay, well, these are the things we need to actually do to make this safe for people. Yeah. And these are people who don't want, their particular hunting rifle to be gone or whatever. Right. But and okay. So from a left-wing perspective, there are a lot of leftists who are really anti-gun control as well, because they say, and I get this, I need to be able to defend myself when the government comes to get me. And I get that. I mean, it's the same argument that a lot of right wingers use, but I don't think that me owning a gun, or a bunch of my neighbors owning guns at this point in history is going to save us when the government comes to shut down our anarcho-communist commune.
I have argued for years that if you look at first principles of the American Second Amendment, if you were to base that on what they were actually conceptually attempting to protect their country against, the twofold elements of protection from tyranny within your own government, and because there was no standing army, protection from foreign forces. So the modern equivalent of that is not the right to have guns, but the right to access the internet. The way we hold our governments accountable in 2021 isn't having a bunch of assault rifles or handguns for when the cops show up. Because quite frankly, that's not going to turn out well for anyone. But it's by using access to information. And the same is true for attacks from foreign powers. Like the attack from the Russians didn't come from Russian forces landing in Chicago.
Right.
Trying to remember where they landed in Red Dawn. But like the Wolverines with machine guns aren't going to be what was needed, because that's not how the attack came. The attack came based on information, and the attack came based on cyber attacks, for lack of a better term. And both major foreign enemies of the United States are attacking the United States in different ways using technology. And the modern version of the militia isn't some guy with a musket. It's some guy debunking misinformation campaigns by the Russians or creating cybersecurity that protects against hacking from China. So, like, if we're going back to first principles, it's not your Mossberg. It's the white hats. So
yeah. Anchor.fm/from many peoples. Our Twitter is at skpoliticspod. Our Facebook is facebook.com/from many peoples strength pod. And our Gmail is frommanypeoples@gmail.com. Or you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/from many peoples. Nobody's bought us a coffee yet.
That's all good. I will buy you a coffee one of these days, Cory.
When we're allowed to go for coffee.
When we're allowed to go for coffee in person again, I will buy you a coffee.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thanks you for doing all the work you do to organize things once again. And I look forward to chatting again next week.